Welcome to The Life of Bryony, the podcast where we navigate life's messier moments. Today, I'm joined by Abigail Dean, former lawyer turned best-selling author, writing novels that are completely unput-downable. I love that quote on the front of a book. Her debut, Girl A, became an international bestseller, selling over 350,000 copies, topping charts around the world, and earning praise for its emotional power and psychological depth. Her new novel, The Death of Us, is part love story, part thriller. It's about trauma, intimacy, and what it means to trust someone, including yourself.
Maybe I'm unusual in this, but I guess whenever I see a particular stories in the news, my brain always just wonders what next. You know, how do people live after that? Not just in the headlines, but how do they live 6 months later and then 5 years later, and in all of those times that we don't see.
My chat with Abigail Dean coming up right after this.
Hello, presenter Bryony.
Hello, producer Jonathan.
I wanted to ask you something actually very quickly.
Yeah.
So on my social media feed, I'm getting a lot of people parroting people's morning routines. I don't know if you've seen it on yours, but I wanted to ask you about your actual nighttime routine.
I think the morning routine thing, like getting up at 3 a.m.
The tape on the mouth?
Removing the tape from the mouth.
Yeah.
Coconut oil pulling. I don't do any of that. My morning routine is get up, go downstairs, make myself a cup of coffee, look at my phone. You
and 100% of the UK, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, but my nighttime routine is really important to me because I think it's a throwback to the fact that I never had one before when I was drinking, and I would just black out and fall into bed. And so now I just love going to bed early. I get into bed. I have my LED mask, the one that makes me look like Jason from Halloween. And I put that on and I read for like 2 hours.
Hang on. What time does the arse hit the mattress?
About 8:30.
Are you going to bed before your daughter?
Sometimes, yeah.
Incredible scenes.
But I don't like go to sleep.
Yeah.
I like to be in my bedroom, just like pootling around, doing my things, putting my, rubbing my magnesium butter on my legs. Oh my God, I hate even myself
You're
as
a different
I tell you
woman.
this. But I like to be safely in my bedroom. It makes me feel, like cocooned because, I don't know, it makes me feel safe. But reading is really one of my most favorite things, and it was definitely something that I did a lot of, and I started to do a lot more of when I got sober. There's a way for me to fill the evening that isn't just like mindlessly scrolling or watching television. So I read a lot of books, which is why I don't know if I've told you, I write books.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my God, there's two of them staring at me from the shelf behind you.
I'm a writer. That is actually my day job. That is my day job. It's not like sitting around talking about myself on podcasts.
I thought you just did this.
It's sitting around writing about myself, right, in books. But anyway, I love books. I love writing. So I thought, why don't we have a book club? Why doesn't The Life of Bryony have a book club? Because, I get a lot of the messages I get on my Instagram are like, can you share what you're reading at the moment? I have a Goodreads, but at the end of every year, I like to do a post of all the books I've read, and I often get loads of people messaging me like, I didn't do one last year.
It's probably nicer to do it throughout the year as well.
Yeah. So I thought, why don't we do a book club and start talking to authors that I like, and about the process of writing, but also about what they like writing, what they get out of writing, what their inspiration for writing is.
You've started with an absolute cracker, I must say, as well.
Abigail Dean. I met Abigail a couple of months ago. We were both doing an event, and I'd followed her for ages, and I read Girl A when it first came out. I just heard her talking about her own personal story, which she touches on in the episode today, which was her experience as a teenager of anorexia and being in hospital suffering from that. And I started to read her new book, and the main female character in that, Isabel, has spent some time as a teenager in hospital with mental illness. And I thought, ooh. And so I got in touch and asked if she'd come on and talk about the book, because I love a book that is, it looks on the bookshelf, it looks like a sort of crime thriller. But as she says, it's much more thoughtful than that, but it has the pace of a thriller. So you're kind of getting through it. But I felt like I also learned a lot about humans through it. I also think if there are any parents listening who have teens who are in trouble or who are suffering and they're struggling and they're thinking, oh my God, what does my child's future hold? I think this conversation will really give you hope, because Abigail had a really difficult start to her life and a really difficult, dark experience. And my, look how she has flourished. And, it was lovely to chat to her. If you're loving these chats as much as I love doing them, why don't we make it official? Hit follow so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to know what you're enjoying about the show. Click the survey link in the show's description. Should we just get going?
Sure.
To this inaugural Life of Bryony book club.
Yeah. Yes,
which I've just sprung on Abigail Dean.
And I'm delighted.
You have said, Abigail, that growing up, you preferred books to people.
Yes.
Tell me about that. What did books give you that humans didn't? Because I totally get it.
So I grew up in a very, very small village in Derbyshire, in the hills of Derbyshire. And I feel it was quite an isolated way to grow up as an only child as well. I was quite a shy, introverted teenager. I think I'm still an introverted person, but I'm probably not a shy person anymore. And I just found such adventure and escapism in books. I think that they just kind of expanded the world in a way that at that time I felt kind of quite frustrated by, living in this relatively kind of small enclosed place. And I think books opened everything up. And I think also, because I was quite shy, things like the experiences that I could have through books, whether it was about, love or traveling or friendship, I found easier to access in fiction than in real life, I think, at that time, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, that's the wonderful thing about reading, isn't it? It takes you to worlds that you can't otherwise get to.
Even better, I think, is something I still find, that it puts you in people's shoes, which otherwise might be harder to imagine.
Yeah.
And I think that's still kind of such a vital part of reading, and something that I still love. But I fortunately don't need to entirely live through books anymore. I like people as well.
The new book, let's talk about The Death of Us, because it is about a couple. It's a kind of a love story, weirdly, but set alongside some pretty traumatic criminal behaviour.
Yes.
Oh, it gives me little shudders, like reading it at home. There was one night I read it and I felt like I was alone in the house. I wasn't, but my husband was away and my daughter was asleep next door. And because it centres on a sort of night crawler.
Yeah, kind of home invader.
A home invader. And in South London, which is where I live, my skin was on fire reading it. So tell us about the book.
Now, a few people have said that for the first time in a decade, they've started using their alarm systems, having read the book. Which, is that a good thing? Yeah,
I don't know. Home safety.
I don't know. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. And that the way I think of it is that it is a love story, and it's almost a love story that's interrupted by this one terrible night of violence. So it follows two characters, Edward and Isabel. And they have a pretty kind of conventional love story in many ways. They meet as students and they move to London in the 90s and they get married and everything is going kind of pretty well for them. And one spring evening, they become victims of this serial home invader who will go on to become a serial killer. And he assaults Isabel, and Edward feels that he is incapable of preventing it. And the book, I guess, is about how that one night affects the rest of their lives, and particularly their relationship. And we meet them in The Death of Us when they're in their 50s. And this invader has finally been caught, and they're in London preparing to deliver their victim impact statements, which throws them back together because they, we find out very early they've since got divorced. So it's a love story, but I guess also a thriller and also a manhunt as well. And I guess a bit of a will they, won't they, I feel,
it is,
in the presence as well.
People listening might be thinking, why, Bryony, for your inaugural Life of Bryony book club, have you chosen a dark crime thriller, Because, the thing of the Life of Bryony is, let's make people feel better about themselves, right?
Yes.
But the reason I chose it is because I think you write about humans in such a sort of empathetic, understanding way, and particularly humans who have been through difficult shit. So Isabel, the main character, I really understood a lot of the darkness that she had experienced in her life. And that's what all of your books have come from, a sort of very human perspective, human emotions, human feelings, human failings,
Yes, yeah.
Is it about exploring, the extremes of human emotion and such like for you?
I think so, in that I think it is almost a thought experiment that if you are pretty happy, so if something like this kind of happens to you, how are you going to react? And it's always going to be more interesting, I think, in books when it is something extreme. But what I care about most is probably that readers can put themselves in both characters' shoes. So, most readers probably have, had a relationship. Most readers can imagine, how would you react if something like this happened? I think that's the case with all the books, wanting people to sort of almost test how they would react in these extreme circumstances. And I think the way you do that is with characters that I hope people love and feel really, really deeply for. And I think certainly with Isabel in this book, I think she's definitely the character who's most similar to me that I've kind of ever written. She totally has definitely has kind of some elements of my voice in a way that I've always been a little frightened, I think, to do before, but you become more confident as you're writing, I think, and more confident to sort of maybe put a little bit more of your heart on the line every time, maybe.
I really liked Isabel.
Yes.
So she's a northerner.
Yes.
And she's had her own troubles, from childhood, from teenhood.
Yes.
I know you've sort of written briefly about that and friendship and things.
Yeah, it was really important, I think, that when I was writing about Edward and Isabel, they are not this kind of perfect couple. So they don't kind of come to this relationship. Everything is, without a doubt, it's just wonderful. And then it's kind of interrupted and everything is to blame on this one terrible, catastrophic crime. I wanted it to be much more that they are kind of two people who have their own, they have their own baggage. The way that everyone, you come into a relationship and you bring your rucksack of issues with you, don't you, in a way. So I think that was key, that they're not this ideal couple. And I think there's a big kind of strand of the novel, which is both of the kind of members of the couple. I think they both try to attribute at times too much of their individual failings to what happened to them. I certainly think to some degree. And so Isabel, she's kind of suffered from terrible depression before she meets Edward at 19. She's been in hospital. She's kind of clambering out of that, I would say, when she meets him. And I think she also sees as being a much more kind of stable, steady influence out of her own mental health struggles and her own issues, really, and sadness. And then when this kind of catastrophic evening takes place a decade later, that really brings those problems back to the forefront. But there's a question as well, had she actually dealt with them in the first place? And I'm not entirely sure. Well, I'll leave readers to answer that. I'm not going to answer it for them. And certainly that's something that I've kind of had experiences with. Like I was, when I was 17, I spent time in hospital in the Priory, good old Priory in Cheshire. And I certainly felt kind of coming out of that, this real kind of, I guess, desire to entirely break free of those problems and to kind of become somebody
shiny and new.
Shiny and new, exactly. And I think that Isabel is slightly guilty of that in the book, that, you know, no wonder that later, after this terrible kind of incident, those are going to be like the first problems that return to you. Because I think if you don't deal with things, often that is the case.
But also, do you mind if we talk a bit about that experience when you were 17?
Yeah, that's fine.
Because I mean, because I also had sort of serious problems with mental illness in my teens, in childhood. I mean, let's call it what it is.
Yeah,
childhood.
exactly.
And at the time, you think you're like a grown up and you should be. I just wanted to ask you a bit about that, because you wrote a really beautiful article, Abigail, about your time in as you said, it was a place, you know, that is known for footballers and celebrities, but your experience was altogether different. But you wrote about your defining memory of that time of being in the Priory was that your best friend came and visited you every day.
Yes, she did. Yeah, and actually, doesn't that just show, I think, like the like heroism of like teenage girls?
Yeah,
and how so much is written about you criticizing the teenage girls and their friendships and how complicated it all is, and how, like, you know, betrayal, like bitchiness, devastation. And I just feel, for me, it was the friendships that like held me together, essentially. That friendship in particular with my friend Ruth, and also. What I will say is, despite, you know, my statement about books and liking books more than people actually were remarkable. There was also a teacher who was the head of English at my school, and he would come every week and he would like teach me
while you were
in the hospital. Yeah, he would teach me in the hospital, because obviously I kind of wasn't able to go to any lessons for 2 months, or a little more than 2 months, and so he would come with his like notes, and we'd go through. I still remember it was Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, the Tom Stoppard play, and what an act of just kindness. So I suppose that's the kind of flip side of these terrible things that might happen to you and that might befall you when you are a child. But there are also these incredible people and moments of light too.
I feel like this will give a lot of comfort to any mothers, you know, listening now who have children who are suffering, that here you are, Abigail Dean, Sunday Times and New York Times bestselling author. You appear to me right now someone who has got her shit together. You know, you've got 2 kids, you're married, you know, your life is together. You've got the life you wanted. You're writing novels, and we can get into a bit of what, you know, you became a lawyer. But that, I think, gives great comfort to people who may have kids who are going through this stuff now.
I hope it does, and I hope it can. I suppose, and I feel like there was a long sort of journey to get there. And I think some of it was luck, you know, having people around me who were incredible and kind of did not give up on me. And I have to say, a huge thing I think was having the mental health services and support, which came, you know, from a very like practical perspective, from my like dad's health insurance. You know, there are those elements that I think now increasingly are not there,
not available,
When I tried to kind of get to the bottom of sort of how did you kind of manage to drag me out of that place, I think it was that people supported me in a way that they were able to sort of see past the illness as well. And I think with any mental health problems, it is so crucial to separate the person who you love from the illness. I think that is really, really important and so difficult to do. And I'm very fortunate in terms of, in a way, I've not had to make that distinction. It was other people, it was my friends and family who had to...
They did it for you.
Who had to do that for me, which I think is very, very tough, because, you know, I was in the Priory with anorexia, and it makes you, as with a lot of mental health conditions, it does not make you a person who is easy to love, I would say. You know, you lie, and you are, you know, as with kind of any kind of addictive behavior, you're manipulative, you shut people out, you will do kind of anything to
feed your
the illness rather than all the things that actually matter in life. And so I think it's so difficult to hang on then to the person rather than be sent away by the illness, which is exactly obviously what the illness wants.
So I'm so sorry you went through that,
Thank you,
Abigail.
Bryony.
And I'm really grateful for you to opening up about it, because I think it is, and presumably that it had been going on for some time before you got to the stage of needing to go to the Priory.
Yes, yeah, about like 6 months, 8 months or so. And it was sort of like my AS level year. So
Right, so
yeah, like, that's the age you turn 17. Yeah, that's it.
okay,
That's it.
And so, did you ask to go somewhere, or were you sort of forced against your will?
It was time. I think was the general consensus of kind of medical professionals and everyone around me. I think it became very clear, very obvious that I kind of wasn't going to get better on my own.
Right.
Which is an assessment that I strongly agree with.
And you were in for
2 months.
2 months.
Yeah.
What was it like?
It was, it was what I needed at the time. I mean, it was pretty grim, I would say, and I think that's one of the things. If you tell people you've been in the Priory, I think people imagine that there was a sort of glamour to the experience. And although there was sort of like, I'm sure I could come up with some relatively funny anecdotes about people insisting on bringing their pets, and there was the humour to it, as there is with everything in life, and often the darker things are, the more humour there is, actually. But it was miserable. It was very lonely, and it was difficult being on kind of an adult ward, because I sort of, at 17, you fit between the
two worlds,
just between them. And it was tough. And I was also incredibly frightened, because it did mean getting better. And I think from any mental illness, the idea of having to work at escaping it is frightening. It's very frightening.
Well, it doesn't feel like getting better, does it? It feels like the opposite.
Yeah, it feels like everything that your mind is telling you not to do. So no, it was grim. And I think actually the only sort of consolation was schoolwork. Actually that was the kind of only normality, was working on revising, and in a way, revising, learning. You'd be sat in the sort of break room post meal times, where you kind of kept there for a certain amount of time as was needed. And I'm just there learning about, I don't know, population in geography or volcanoes.
Yeah. Well,
so just a strange mix of these kind of worlds of normality and also this kind of these extreme difficulties, and sort of wondering, like, how have I ended up here? Things have really not gone as planned. But I think it also gave me a massive impetus to keep getting better. I think it did. That if these are your lives, that one life will be lived, in an institution with great scrutiny on your behaviour, and an inability to really read or write. Like, I enjoyed very little by that point, because all I could think about was food. If that is one life, and your other life is to go to university and to work and to write and to be with your friends and to go on nights out and to fall in love, that's your choice. And I think it really did come down to that. And being in hospital put that in very stark, quite brutal contrast, that those are the kind of lives that you can choose between, and you still now have the choice.
To fall in love, to go to university, to live a life.
Yeah, I think I was just about still able to make the choice. I do think that, I think it becomes harder the longer you have been ill.
Yeah, tough.
And so I don't want to sort of, I don't want to sort of give the impression that I think everyone has that choice. But I felt like I did just about have enough ability to see that these were the two kind of options. So I don't want to sort of sound as if
I get it. Does
that make sense?
Well, no, I do. Yeah. I totally get it, because I know this from an addiction point of view. Like, we talk about rock bottoms or whatever, but there's always another rock bottom.
Yes,
and
agreed.
I feel very lucky. Addiction, and I think this is the same with eating disorders. They're a lift going down, and you can choose whatever floor you want to get off. But if you get back on, you will go lower. And you never go up.
Yes,
you see what I mean?
Lift's going one direction,
And so you're right. And the longer you're in the lift, the longer your choice starts to disappear. So yeah, I don't want to make it like, oh, Abigail, you're a better person than other people because I know that, because you made the choice of life. What I meant more was there's a fork in the road, where, and I mean, I guess the thing about life, isn't it, is that we think of it as there's a fork in the road and you can go that way or you can go that way. But when you choose to go that way, you might come to another fork in the road. And you did come to another fork in the road, So you went to university, you became a lawyer.
Yes, and I did become a lawyer. I didn't really know what else I wanted to be at the end of university. As a lot of people who I think love words, you're like, well, I'm not going to be able to be an accountant. I think this was sort of like what was going on in my head. I tried journalism. I just wasn't very good at it.
Well, no, but I mean, me neither.
Priory. Wasn't great at that. Tried PR. Not brilliant there either. I don't think I was sufficiently kind of enthusiastic. And
you have to deal with a lot of people as well in PR.
So many people.
Not that many books.
Not that many books. And so I kind of did some work experience in law, and I thought, I quite like this. I think I could find a niche. I had in terms of in my 20s, I worked as a lawyer from the age of about 24 until 2023, until 33.
Oh my God. So really recently?
Yeah, really recently. I worked for law firms for a while, and then I worked for Google for the last sort of 4 years of my career.
Let's not beat around the bush here. You're a lawyer for big law firms for Google. That's going to take up a lot of your time, right? So when did you find the time to start writing? Like how did you, because I bet you there are people listening who think, I'd love to write a book. How do you magic yourself from this job, this full-time career to sitting here as a full-time writer?
I started writing Girl A between jobs. And so I've been at law firms for sort of, I'm trying to think how long now, maybe 6-7 years. And I was definitely getting to the stage where it was no longer making me happy, because the hours in law firms are, remarkably.
What are the hours?
You'll see if in The Death of Us. I mean, Edward, who is a lawyer.
Yeah, he doesn't.
He doesn't. He if he wants to be in the office every day to work away,
you can lose
trauma. You can.
Yeah,
that option is there. The hours are. I think it's the unpredictability. So it's you might have some days that are a normal 9 to 5, but you'll have other days that are 9 to 3-4 a.m. And you'll also have, it's the cancellation of plans, I think, as well. I found it very, very hard to have to cancel from friends and cancel on my partner, who is also a lawyer and is still a lawyer. And I think if you have two people cancelling, I mean,
really?
You're never going to see each other. I started to dislike the absolute inability to plan my life in any way. And I also knew that at some point I did want a family. And I think it's very, very difficult to balance those two things. Working in a law firm, having a family is tough. So I resigned I still remember it was sort of in springtime. It was like the cliche of like the sun coming out. And I spent the whole summer, so June to August, off work and writing, and started writing Girl A. And I had very, very big ambition. I was going to finish this novel over the summer. Give 3 months, I'll have a novel. And I obviously didn't. I mean, how ridiculous. I didn't.
I don't know, because this is, okay, so Life of Bryony Book Club, because it is, the question I'm asked most having written I should remember how many books I've written now, but 8 non-fiction books or 7 non-fiction books. And then I've just written my first novel, right? But the people often ask, how long does it take you to write a book? And it's sort of like, well, how long is a piece of string?
Yes.
Novel writing, let me tell you, Abigail, is a whole different ball game to non-fiction writing. Because non-fiction, I'm just writing about myself. The editor can't go, I'm sorry, Bryony, we don't like the ending. Because you're like, well, that's my life.
Yeah, that's
what happened to me.
Yeah.
I can't change that. Whereas novel writing, they're like, I filed my first draft recently. And my editor was like, thank you for handing me all the jigsaw puzzle pieces. Have you considered putting them in the right order?
That's quite brutal.
But that's kind of like novel writing. Is like the idea that we sit down and you just write a book and then it comes out. That is, it's a real process.
Yeah, it's a full process. No, I agree.
So there's 3 months of Girl A. And let's also talk about Girl A was unbelievably dark.
Yeah, it's about a girl who survived her kind of family's cult.
Right.
I guess.
Relatable.
Fortunately, not too relatable in this instance. Fortunately, not too relatable. And her mother, who's been in prison since she was a child, since the girl, the main character, was a child, has died in prison, and she's left Lex, who is Girl A, the girl who kind of escaped from the cult, freed her siblings. She has left her and the siblings the family home. And so Lex has to essentially decide what to do with this house where she was abused. And it's a case of reconnecting with her siblings to get the consensus of what they do with their legacy, really, and the legacy of their parents' abuse.
So let me ask you, tell me, because I sit here, you're wearing a lovely pink top, you're joyous, you've got zebra skin shoes on, you've got this lovely energy to you. Where does the darkness come from? I mean, obviously you obviously had dark experiences in your own life, anorexia, being in hospital, but what draws you to this kind of stuff?
I suppose for me, I don't find it that unusual to be drawn to the kind of darker parts of humanity, because those are the kind of most extreme acts that people will go through, that characters could possibly go through. And so I guess it feels quite natural to me to wonder, how does that happen? How could that possibly take place? And if it did, how would you survive that? I think that's always kind of the question that all three of my books have kind of, at the heart of them, is really, how do you survive after that? How do your relationships survive? How do you survive, with your head and your heart intact? And is that possible? So maybe I'm unusual in this, but I guess whenever I see a particular stories in the news, my brain always just wonders, what next? How do people live after that? Not just in the headlines, but how do they live 6 months later, and then 5 years later, and in all of those times that we don't see? I think that is always a really interesting question. It's always going to be attached to the most extreme behaviours, because they are, to me, I guess, because they are remarkable in their awfulness. They are not things that happen to people every day.
It's a place to find inspiration and strength and hope, isn't it? I always remember that when I was in the depths of addiction and depression, and I couldn't get out of bed. I used to sometimes, this is going to sound, I don't think I've ever told anyone this before. I used to spend days imagining that I was actually hiding in a basement in an apocalypse, like a nuclear apocalypse had happened, as a zombie apocalypse had happened. And I imagined, and I think what it was it was like I found almost some comfort in there being a worse thing.
Yes.
Than what I was actually going through, and that almost imagining that the world had just gone, and I could just be safe. And it sounds so weird. And I guess also there's that thing of when you're watching, because we know that crime thrillers, people love reading them, maybe there is a kind of I'm going to watch this thing, I'm going to go to this place, and I'm going to see humans have to experience the most extraordinary, extreme things, and and how they respond and how they come through it.
Yes, yeah. And beyond it as well, I think there's then space for the hope and for the humour. And I've always been really, really happy, particularly in relation to The Death of Us, when some people have said, it's actually quite funny in parts. And people are kind of surprised at that. And I guess I don't find it surprising, because I think people are very, very good at finding the humour or love or hope in terrible situations. So it's a book where there's a lot of evil in there, but there is also a huge amount of kind of love. I genuinely think that. So
you write Girl A, which came out in
2021.
Okay, so you're still working as a lawyer?
Yes, yeah. We're still working as a lawyer. And I also, a week after Girl A came out, was published, I found out I was pregnant as well.
Okay.
With our first little boy. at that time, we was in lockdown. In a way, I think I was just in this sort of very odd, like suspended space where, lockdown was so odd. It was so otherworldly. Girl A had come out, and, the weird thing about anything like a book being published, Girl A came out and it was kind of in the charts. Feel very, very lucky that all that happened. But life is unchanged. You're kind of, especially lockdown kind of pronounced that. We were still just at home, me, Richard, my husband, and the cat. And that was, it was the very kind of odd time. It felt kind of natural to keep working at that time. So I did. I was trying to write Day One, my second novel, having real difficulties writing it. And then after my son was born, I was still struggling to write Day One. And it was when I went back to work after maternity leave that within about 3 months, it became clear that there was no way I could possibly be kind of the mum that I wanted to try to be and be a lawyer and be a writer.
Did it become apparent through like burnout or?
It became apparent through this quite kind of dark, awful winter we had so I went back to work in kind of September, October when my son was just turning 1. And my husband couldn't have been busier at work. Like he was just sort of absent at that time, doing the best he could, but mostly absent. And it was just one of those like the litany of things. Like our bathroom ceiling collapsed. Our cat got fleas, which like invaded the house.
Oh, and I hate it when that happens.
It's just the worst. just this endless. And I was sort of trying to work and go to the office and be presentable.
There's a lot of women listening to this right now, nodding along, going, yeah, kitchen, bathroom ceiling falling through, cat got fleas, trying to get my shit together to work.
Exactly. Tick. Running between like the nursery and work. And within about 2 months, I think I was sort of like, no, this is not going to happen. I can't do these 3 things. So the law kind of had to go. And that is also, I think some writers, they give up their job and they're like, yes, like screw you guys. I hated this job. Get a book deal, go. I did really like working at Google. And, have like a lot of friends still there. And I really liked my job. It was a very, very like interesting role. So I don't want to be that person who's, it was a hard decision to make. It was just a bit of an inevitable one.
Mm-hmm. But you're glad you made it.
I'm glad I made it.
Because you've now got 2 babies.
Yes, 2 babies. Yeah.
And I think it's really important to talk about this, how actually the people juggling it all are probably not doing so with any ease, Yes. Like there will be a lot of balls being dropped. There will be a lot of stress. And I certainly found that especially when I went back to work after maternity leave, I had very quickly, and also I was terrified during maternity leave. I kind of was like, I shouldn't be taking this time, the pressure. And this was like 12 years ago, I was like, oh, I need to kind of keep in touch days. I need to show work that I'm still there, that I haven't gone, I remember like 5 weeks after my daughter was born, like doing a work job, which I probably shouldn't have done, but being like, oh, put it in the keeping in touch days. But then going back to work and very quickly being like, I can't do this. I can, and thinking I was somehow going to work the same way I had before. Yeah. I was like, I cannot work this quote unquote hard. Something is going to have to change. But really fundamentally realizing that the thing that was going to have to change was me.
Yes.
It was not going to be the work system. And so I was going to have to be briny big balls and put on my big girl pants and go in and say, sorry, I can't work Fridays or whatever. I'm going to have to go down to 4 days, or we're going to have to make this work. And I'm really lucky, Abigail, that I have a job whereby now I have made it work around me. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Flexibility, which I know a lot of women don't have. But that means having to work. I always sometimes say this to my husband, I work 6.5 days a week. And he's like, that's 7 days a week, Bryony.
Yes.
And I couldn't. Yeah. And the reality is, I've only got 1 child. I couldn't have the career I had if I'd had more than 1 child.
And that is kind of depressing. Isn't it? It is.
Yeah.
And I agree that there are a lot of employers who do really talk the talk. And words are very easy in this context, but the fact is that for them it is inconvenient if you can't make a big call at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And most kind of working mothers cannot make a call at 6 p.m. unless there is another person kind of picking their child up from nursery or school. And I think that is, there's a very, very, very quickly, there's a big kind of conflict between wanting to do the right thing, right? And the reality of just how inconvenient it is for them. And it is inconvenient. I think that's kind of like a fact that has to be addressed. But I think they have to embrace it. They have to deal with that inconvenience and think of ways around it and be a slightly more creative than, as you said, it's you having to put on your big girl pants. That's maybe, they could put on some different pants.
Yeah.
Instead.
Abigail, let me ask you how you look after yourself. Because, you have 2 kids, you have a big work life, even getting rid of the lawyer bit, you still have a big work life. And I just wondered how recovery, I guess, is what, I know anorexia was a long time ago for you, but I know as someone who has experienced eating disorders and addiction and things like that, these are things that we have to work with on a daily basis to maintain wellness. I guess they're sort of, a lot of mental illnesses they're not things that you can necessarily cure. Do you know what I mean? Like flu.
Yes, yeah.
You live with the sort of potential for them to flare up again. Would you say that's your experience, or do you feel like you've put it behind you?
I think that I've put it behind me, but I would say that kind of warily, if that makes sense, because I think that when things are going relatively well and are relatively stable, it is much easier to believe that's the case. And I think that it's always worth being kind of almost vigilant, I guess, is how I sort of feel about my own kind of mental health, is that, I can often see, I feel like I know what the first sort of signs are, and I'm quite aware of that now. I guess all it takes is kind of one event, like one catastrophe. It might not even be a catastrophe. It could be something completely removed from that to be down in that lift again, as we said. It's not hard to imagine being back there. And so I think for me, I exercise for the love of it. And it is one of the things like running that makes me feel incredibly free without any of the terrible associations that used to be attached to it. I absolutely love feeling kind of stronger, and the liberty that comes with running on a beautiful day.
That's the thing, the freedom of, that is the word, isn't it, with running?
Yeah.
And as you say, the thing, as we both know, having done exercise to punish ourselves when we're younger, there's something even doubly rewarding about then realizing, oh my God, I'm exercising to nourish myself.
Yeah, because it's like a wonderful, beautiful day and I want to be in the sunshine, rather than, because I ate X, Y, Z yesterday.
Yeah.
I feel like those two things are now kind of successfully totally detached, which is great, because I really do love exercise. I feel like it's difficult with 2 small children in terms of finding time for yourself.
Yep.
Coming out of the newborn days, we're getting more than 3 hours sleep in a row.
How old is your newborn?
He's 9 months now.
Oh my God. And you wrote this book when?
So this book was written before he arrived, before pregnancy actually. So
okay, right.
It was edited when I was pregnant, but it was written the year after I resigned from Google. So it was written in that year of having a child at nursery, not being pregnant, feeling like I'd left kind of the legal world behind. So I had that thinking space. And it was it was a book that I'd wanted to write since I was in my 20s.
Really?
In London. That was when the idea first kind of cropped up. And obviously I just had no time and no real determination either. I don't want to blame it entirely on the time. No time and no kind of real drive to write it. But I was like, I kind of wanted to write about the effect that a sexual assault would have on a couple. That was kind of the idea. And then I think all the characters and the details came after. Yeah.
So also that's another thing to say to anyone listening or watching, is that trust the timing. Things come to you, but they may not actually reappear until a decade or so later.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, literally kind of over a decade. I think it's about 13 years that I sort of had the idea initially. And that's a long time to be mulling. But I think that is it. If you have that one idea where you're like, oh, I can't quite leave this alone, you know, that it keeps returning time and again, it might be a good one.
The Death of Us is out now, available to buy from all good bookstores and bad ones as well that are online. And also, I would love you to go and read The Death of Us and then get in touch via all the contact details that are in the show notes, or leave a comment on the Instagram or on our YouTube and let us know what you think of the book. It is a love story with chilling oomph.
Yeah, it's like a love story. It's been interrupted by a thriller halfway through.
I love it. I love it. And I'm so grateful that you have come in and allowed The Death of Us to be Abigail Dean, our first Life of Bryony book club pick. Thank you for coming on The Life of Bryony and for writing your brilliant books.
Thank you, Bryony. Thank you for having me.
A huge thank you to Abigail for being so thoughtful, so open, and so generous with her story today. Her journey is proof that it's never too late to rewrite your own story, even if it's just one paragraph at a time. The Death of Us is out now and available from all good bookstores, but also in ebook and audiobook format. Don't forget to follow or subscribe. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.